Hello and welcome to this first look exploring session, looking at the royal entry for King Edward VI just before his coronation day, in 1547, depending on how you count the years, because it's February, so I suppose it's technically 1546 as far as they're concerned. In old money, it's 1546. New money, it's 1547. Past that, if you will, because New Year isn't until March 25th, so that's how it used to be. So we're going to be reading through some of the accounts of the royal entry into London. There's an awful lot of material potentially we could use. I've sort of grabbed a certain bag of stuff. We're not going to get to the coronation itself. We're not going to be looking at some of the entertainment stuff that Edward gets sort of more around his coronation and afterwards. There's an awful lot of detail there, which we may come to in the future in future videos. But this one is, as I say, focusing on the royal entry and reading today, amongst lots of other things, but reading Second Child, Fortune, Astronomy, St. George, and Truth is...
Lynsey Beauchamp, actor in Kirkcaldy, Scotland.
Reading Valentine, Nature, England, Chorus, amongst other things, is...
Tom from Brighton.
Reading First Child, Grace, Charity, Sapience, ER. I'm not sure what the ER actually is supposed to stand for. I'm sure the text will tell us later on. Is...
Liza Graham in London.
And also our resident expert as ever to help guide us through anything to do with London, normally in a much more mayorly direction rather than royally direction, is...
I'm Tracey, I'm in Bath.
And I'm your host, Robert Crighton, but in a moment I'm going to cease to be I'm going to turn into a map, so I'm going to ask everyone to briefly switch their videos off, because you're all probably used to me putting up on my screen this little Lord Mayor's Show map that we've done in the past. But it's not very useful for royal entries. Royal entries do change routes; they're not exactly the same. But I've produced something a little more explanatory, hopefully, that we may play with. This, broadly speaking, most of the royal entries I've looked at or we've looked at so far, they tend to start to one side of London, somewhere around the Tower, but not always. Sometimes they enter via one of the gates, which we'll come to in a moment. And broadly speaking, they all head towards Cheapside and make their way along there, and then again, precisely where the procession ends and where they peel off does vary. I have an additional version of this map where I include an outline of the gates of the city as well, so you get a general shape. This isn't to scale. There is no precise logic to this. And you even noticed I've vaguely started. I need to completely redraw the map to make it work. But we have had royal entries in the past that enter actually from the river going across London Bridge. So at some point I will properly attach an additional line there. And there are other royal events which enter. I think there's one that enters via Aldgate or something like that. But that's something for the future. So there's lots of additions to go to this. But that gives us just a general shape. We're going to be moving from one side to the other as we go, and there'll be more detail coming up. Rejoin me in the room, people, as I'm going to take this out and turn myself back into a human being. So I say there's quite a lot of material potentially about how this particular royal entry was organised. This is obviously for the coronation. King Henry VIII has died. Ah, well... depending on your point of view of Henry VIII and depending on your opinion of King Edward VI. And so we're going to open with just a brief little register from the Privy Council. There's an awful lot of this kind of material. This is just a nice little example. I'll ask Liza to just read that, please.
Register of the Privy Council, February 12th, This day the Lord Protector and others his co-executors, whose names be hereunto subscribed, upon mature and deep deliberation had amongst them, did finally resolve that forasmuch as divers of the old observances and ceremonies toforetimes used at the coronations of the kings of this realm were by them thought meet for sundry respects to be corrected, and namely for the tedious length of the same, which should weary and be hurtsome peradventure to the king's majesty, being yet of tender age, fully to endure and bide out, and also for that many points of the same were such as by the laws of the realm at this present were not allowable,
etc. So it's an interesting little hint about how royal entries are not necessarily always the same, and we haven't really done that much prior to this for a sort of coronation thing. We have done a couple. There is more to come, I think, and certainly more accounts. But it's interesting, this question about were not allowable is an interesting thing. Liza.
This is our first coronation post-Reformation, isn't it? So a lot of I'm thinking Tracey will know chapter and verse on this, I'm sure, but a lot of the oaths were probably a little too Catholic. And perhaps some of the religious service and yeah, they say it's meet to be corrected. So that's
Yeah, absolutely. And that there's an emphasis later on in that there's Protestant lords there, just to kind of emphasise it. And even though poor Edward was only 9 years old, just the idea of a 9-year-old child. Well, he didn't actually make it through it, did he? He skipped a lot of it. But he'd already made his opinions, I think, quite clear about how he felt about religious matters, which has only become even more clear in the next few years. So, yeah, it's definitely that. It's that uncertainty about how things are going to go. And then, of course, 1953, it all swings right back around again.
And it is a shame that this session we're not going to get to the actual coronation itself, because a certain amount of that is probably referring more to the coronation ceremony as well, about the nature of the oaths and the things going on there, that we're not going to get to, sadly, this time, but maybe in the future, because there's lots of material. But let's get to the day itself of the royal entry. So I'll ask Lynsey to start us off, then Tom to read the next paragraph, and then Liza to follow.
On Saturday, being the 19th day of February, about 1:00 in the afternoon, the King's Royal Majesty proceeded from the Tower of London through his City of London in most royal and goodly wise towards his Palace of Westminster, in the which was made divers and goodly provision for the receipt of his most royal person, as hereafter shall be declared.
First, the streets through all the way where the king should pass were well gravelled in every place thereof, and railed on the one side from Grace Church to the little Cowdeth conduit in Cheap, to the intent that the horses should not slide on the pavement, nor the people should not be hurt by the said horses in the high streets.
within rails stood the crafts along in their order to the little conduit aforesaid, whereas stood the aldermen. On the other side the streets, in many places stood priests and clerks with their crosses and censers, and in their best ornaments to cense the king. And by all the way where the king should pass, on either side the way was the windows and walls goodly garnished with cloths of tapestry, arras, cloth of gold, and cloth of tissue, with cushions of the same, garnished with streamers and banners as richly as might be devised. And in many places were ordained goodly pageants and devices, and therein goodly melody and eloquent speeches of noble histories, treating of the joyful welcoming and receipt of so noble a king, as hereafter more plainly shall be declared.
So we just got a nice little overview, which I quite like. We've had details like this before, where the king should pass were well gravelled. I think we've had that mentioned in previous ones, and also this railing to keep the crowds back and to keep everyone safe as well. I always like that the horses should not slide on the pavement, nor the people should be hurt by the said horses in the high streets. It's a health and safety element as well, when we were organising our Lord Mayor's show, there was an awful lot of questions about health and safety, and it's nice to know actually nothing's changed. They weren't quite so unquestioning of such things. I mean, of course, how much of that is health and safety for the people, but also keeping the people reasonably controlled and away from the person of the king might also be an element there. So that's an interesting thought. I'm also interested in the crosses and censers. So, we're talking about, yes, it's post-Reformation, but, some things take a long time to change. And what we mean by, Protestantism is not so clearly defined, even in a much more evangelical position.
As someone who sings in a lot of different churches, I can tell you that censers are still used in high Anglican places, like very high Anglican and sort of Anglo-Catholic.
But there's been a swing. There's been a swing of the pendulum since so the pendulum swings back and forth.
It's true, but it's quite nice if you have to ride through the streets of London with everyone out there. It's kind of nice to swing a censer. Makes it smell better, I guess. And also, incense is really expensive. It's a luxury item, so it's, I suppose, part of honoring the king, really.
And also, if you've got a lot of horses, you might want something to make everything smell a little nicer. There's always that.
I think it's more the people than the horses that are the problem, but yeah.
Okay, let's get in a little more detail. So I'll ask Lynsey to read the next paragraph, then Liza, then Tom, and then Tracey. Why not? And then we'll go Lynsey, Liza, Tom, Tracey until we stop. I'm going to read the order of proceeding though, Lynsey, so you can start at the actual paragraph as we go. I'll pause at some point because I'm not going to read all of the order of proceeding, but we'll just sort of skip through it. So we have a list of sort of the way it goes. So we've got the king's messengers going 2 by 2. There's a certain Noah quality to some of this. Gentlemen 2 and 2, then strangers, ambassadors, servants. Then the trumpets, chaplains, all the squires, all knights, chaplains of dignity. So we're chaplains without dignity first. Squires, knights, chaplains of dignity. Gentlemen and noblemen's sons, barons, bishops, earls' sons, marquises' sons, dukes' younger sons, earls, marquises, then dukes, then the controller of the household and the secretary of Venice, then the treasurer of the king's house and one of the ambassadors of the Protestants, then Sir William Peter, secretary, with another ambassador of Protestants. Then we're starting to get to some names here. We're getting Lord Admiral, Lord Privy Seal, Lord Great Master, Lord Chancellor, Archbishop of Canterbury, various ushers, Garter in the King's coat of arms on the right hand, Mayor of London carrying a mace on the left hand, sergeants of arms, sword borne by the Constable of England for that time, the Earl of Warwick, Earl of Arundel, and then a little before the king on the left hand, the Duke of Somerset, Lord Protector. So quite a lot of people. Lynsey.
Then the King's Royal Majesty walking a little before his canopy, because the people might better see his grace, his highness being richly apparelled, with a rich gown of cloth of silver, all over embroidered with damask gold, with a gherkin of white velvet, wrought with Venice silver, garnished with precious stones as rubies and diamonds, with true loves of pearls, a doublet of white velvet according to the same, with like precious stones and pearls, a white velvet cap garnished with like stones and pearls, and a pair of buskins of white velvet. His horse caparison of crimson satin, embroidered with pearls and damask gold.
Then his footmen in their rich coats going about his grace and on either side the canopy. Then the canopy borne by 6 knights with certain assistants to them. Then Sir Anthony Brown, master of the horse, leading a goodly courser of honour, very richly trapped, and on every side of him the equerries.
Then came 9 henchmen on 9 goodly horses, with saddles of estate, and riding bareheaded, every of them apparelled in a cassock, parted in the midst, on one half gold of cloth, the other gold of silver, and their horses trapped like with the with light trappers of the same. Then came Sir Francis Bryant, master of the henchmen, riding alone. Then gentlemen and grooms of the privy chamber, riding two and two. Then the pensioners and men of arms with their poleaxes, going on either side the way on foot, from the beginning of the two estates of Normandy and Goujon, and so continuing till the gentlemen of the privy chamber.
Then next, after gentlemen and grooms of the privy chamber, the captain of the guard riding alone. Then next after following all the guards, 5 in a rank on foot with their halberds in their hands. Then all noblemen and gentlemen's servants going in order after the degrees and estates of their masters on foot. Memorandum, that on either side the way, from the beginning of the train to the pensioners' officers of arms to give order, and gentlemen with other tipstaves made room all the way, and thus in goodly order proceeded.
By the time the King's Highness was entered into Mark Lane, there was a very great peal of ordnance shot at the Tower. Then at Fenchurch Street was ordained a scaffold rich hung with cloth of arras, and therein divers singing men and children, singing and playing on the regales as the King's Highness came by.
At the conduit in Cornhill was ordained a goodly pageant, hanged and garnished with rich arras, and had upon the same a proper conduit which ran with fair sweet wine. And in the same were diverse instruments and goodly singing, and 2 children richly apparelled pronounced to the King's Highness these speeches following.
But we'll pause before we get to the actual speeches, because there's lots of interesting little details that we've got there. Beyond the general order of proceedings, of which we get sort of various details there. 9 goodly horses. We want to have the goodly horses. I like the little memorandum moment. The officers of arms and gentlemen with other tipstaves made room all the way. So is this sort of the slightly more royal version of Whifflers, isn't it? And so it's people making sure that the order is kept good and ordered. So we said and Fenchurch. I'm assuming that's Fenchurch. There's a scaffold. So this is we're not at our usual locations in Cheapside yet. We're still a way off. They left the Tower, and as I say, the map isn't exactly perfect in terms of giving the sense of the streets that they're going down. And we're going to head towards the Cornhill and the conduit there. Thoughts on the room, Tracey?
They used the same route for James's coronation in 1604, as it turned out, because of plague. And they too came up from the Tower along Mark Lane. And Mark Lane was and remains a very, very narrow little lane. And it goes on to Fenchurch Street, which is relatively wide, and the church is in the middle of the street. So there would have been quite an interesting transition of this procession kind of going up, being very slow order up this narrow lane, coming out into a much bigger street to be presented by this scaffold hung rich with cloth of arras and so on.
And of course we have queues here that's going off. Entered into Mark Lane, great peal of ordnance shot off at the Tower. So, again, this question I'm always going at the stage management, is someone just waving and King's in place and go, and waving flags or something to make sure that the ordnance shoots at exactly the right time. I like the way that the King's walking a little bit ahead of his sort of overhanging canopy because he's quite small, presumably, or just to make sure a decent line of sight. Liza.
It's I am, as you say, quite struck by the amount of stage management that this takes, and also by the emphasis on music. They've got at Fenchurch Street, they've got one pageant with singing men and children, and a singing man is like a lay clerk. It's an adult professional musician. Playing on the regales, and the regale is a portable organ that makes a sound sort of like squarp. Anyone who plays a regale, that's exactly what it sounds like, except it plays chords. It's sort of, Yeah, squirp. But the sound carries. It carries really well. And you can, unlike a church organ, it's portable. You can carry it. You probably have someone pumping the bellows for it. Yeah, and in the conduit we have in Cornhill, the conduit, that's not the same as the little conduit, is it?
No, we're not at Cheapside yet. So
it's
this is on the route.
It's on the junction of Gracious Street and Cornhill. So if you come up Fenchurch Street and then you turn right and then you turn left, it's on the left junction.
Yes, and we have a conduit running wine, which is delicious, and then in the same, I guess the pageant is attached to the conduit, or maybe there's room on the stonework or something. In the same were diverse instruments and goodly singing. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, well, they don't stint on these things. Or,
You've done a little bit more detail. I've never been able to work out quite how they made wine run through conduits, but they say that at the conduit in Cornhill, the great conduit in Cheap and conduit in Fleet Street, wine by pretty, witty and artificial vices, plenteously running, as through the same had come out of the cisterns of the same conduits. At every of the same conduits, one hogshead of red wine and another of claret.
So that's very helpful by ingenious devices. Thanks for that. Couldn't give us a clue, could you, history? No, of course not. That would just be silly. Okay, never mind.
Well, it might be a trade secret.
It might be. Yeah, we'll give them that. Okay, let's find out what's happened at this particular junction in Cornhill. We have 2 speeches and a song. So I'll ask first child and second child, and first child if you could do the song as well, so you can alternate, as it were. So okay. Liza, then Lynsey, then Liza again.
Hail, noble Edward, our king and sovereign. Hail, the chief comfort of your commonalty. Hail, redolent rose, whose sweetness to retain is unto us all such great commodity, that earthly joy to us none more can be. Blessed, therefore, be our Lord omnipotent, which hath so noble a king to us sent. Hail, comely king, the cause of all our mirth. Hail, flourishing flower in your royal estate, whose princely presence our hearts to upstart, for that God hath made us so fortunate. Jesu with grace your highness illuminate, and grant unto us our heart's request, which is health to your highness, peace and rest.
O noble Edward, the 6th of that name, whom God hath provided for our great comfort, to reign in this realm of excellent fame, the only cause of unity and concord. Thanks be therefore unto our heavenly Lord, which doth not fail his servants in distress, as here doth appear in your noble highness.
And then we get a song.
King Edward, God save King Edward. God save King Edward, and long to continue in grace and virtue, unto God's pleasure, his commons to rejoice, whom we ought to honor, both to love and dread, as our most noble King and sovereign Lord, next under God of England and Ireland the supreme head, whom God hath chosen by his mercy so good, King Edward the 6th, to have the sword, his subjects to defend, his enemies to put down, according to right in every town. Good Lord in heaven, to thee we sing, grant our noble king to reign and spring from age to age like Solomon the sage, whom God preserve in peace and war, and safely to keep him from all danger.
Then they proceeded in goodly order unto Cheapside, where we're much more familiar with the territory. I mean, it's a sweet little ditty, but I don't think it's going to win any awards for subtlety, is it?
Well, maybe the tune was really nice.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm sure it fits, but it's God save King Edward, God save King Edward.
Well, he's only 9. He's not actually done very much with his life yet. So it's a nice little kind of tactful references to his age. He's kind of a flower, and elsewhere this is he's going to kind of grow, and maybe they're going to die 7 years later. But hey, poor lad. Yeah. So there is, I think you're right. I think there is like not awkwardness, but you couldn't kind of do the usual full on, sovereign stuff quite with the child.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. How, because we know with Lord Mayor shows that things are very directed at the Lord Mayor, and how much of this is being pitched for a 9-year-old to stay awake and not get bored. We have touched on some of the earlier some earlier stuff. Where we have because when we did Henry VI, some of his stuff where going, God, the child must have been bored witless. I mean, just nudge him and keep him awake. So you wonder how structured it is for that, because it could be a long day. Though he's older than I think here, so I don't think it's that bad. Anyway, let us continue. So I will ask Liza if you could read the next bit of prose. Lynsey, could you read Urson? I didn't ask you to read Urson, I don't think I asked anyone to read Urson. How remiss of me. And then Tom, you're down for Valentine, and then I'll read the next bit, and then we'll see where we are. At the great conduit in Cheap were ordained these things following.
First, before the entry of the foresaid conduit stood 2 persons resembling Valentine and wild Urson, the one clothed with moss and in leaves, having in his hand a great club of yew tree for his weapon, the other armed as a knight, and they pronounced these speeches following.
All those that be enemies to Edward the King, I shall them clout with great confusion, and make him mighty by virtuous living, his mortal foe to oppress and bear down, and him to increase as Christ's champion, that all injuries from him be
I have no idea.
admitulate by God's grace at the enter of this gate. For I, wild Urson, doth here signify an emperor's son of excellent majesty, notwithstanding in a forest nourished by a bear, where many nights I did there conquer. Thus I am come, being nothing afraid of all rebels, to defend King Edward. Whensoever they come, early or late, I shall them thrash here at this gate.
And also Valentine I do here represent, the emperor's son of Greece, whereof he had a regiment, yet in a forest found by Pepin the French king, long brought up by him in martial conning, and thus shortly after by the king's monition, the same Valentine vanquished his brother Urson, thus as we both assign to keep this gate, that the king's enemies shall not enter in threat.
At the end of the same conduit there was paled in a rock garnished with roses, gelasias, and other kinds of flowers, upon the which there was a sumptuous fountain, and upon the top thereof a crown imperial of gold, garnished as it stood with rich pearl and stones. Under the same were certain springs, out of the which came plenty of wine, red and claret, descending through pipes into the street amongst divers sorts of people, who by the space of 6 hours with great diligence fetched it away. I'm just going to briefly pause there. It took 6 hours for the crowd to drink it dry. It's 6 hours worth of claret. Which ran out first? Yeah.
I think like the Royal Coronation game, pub crawl game, is when you run around to all the various conduits trying all the different wine.
Now, does anyone have anything on Orson and Valentine as figures? Because obviously we get a narrative here which does feel like it's the kind of thing to keep a child awake. Of bam bam, I'm nourished by bear, type thing. I don't know whether anyone's got anything on them? Because I'm not familiar particularly by these two brothers.
I've been trying to find something, but I mean, Valentine helps by giving us some of his backstory, that he's the son of the Greek emperor and in a forest. So I guess this is part of the matter of France. In a forest he's found like by Pepin, the French king. Pepin may be the father of Charlemagne, and Charlemagne is one of the subjects of the matter of France.
I'm doing my best Gallic shrug there.
But I mean, often in other pageants as whifflers, we've seen green men with clubs, and Urson seems to be ultimately a woodwose, a wild man of the sort that fascinated the medievals. He seems to be of the same type. You can't really have a party without a wild man, and it's nice that. And it's nice that they also sort of represent the duality of humanity, that you've got this, wild creature covered in green with a yew tree, and also a goodly knight who's the son of the Greek emperor, and they're brothers, and they fight crime. And I'm just making it up at this point.
You're trying to turn it into a pitch for a television series now.
Yes, yes, I am. The ultimate road trip buddy movie is Valentine and Urson.
Yeah. So yeah, maybe. But yeah, it's Valentine vanquishes his brother, so maybe it's about the gentrification or something. That kind.
Well, usually if someone goes mad, you have to vanquish them in combat and then take them back and heal them, and then they miraculously come to their senses. Usually. I mean, if Arthurian romance has taught me anything, it's that if someone you love goes a bit doolally, you just have to hit them over times. And anyway,
fair enough. Okay, we're going to go forward. So we've got this around the conduit. We've got lots of flowers impaled on the structure there. A crown of imperial of gold with lots of stones, and of course that's where all the liquid flows. Then we're going to have some children in a moment now. So Liza's reading Grace and Charity. I'm going to ask Lynsey and Tom to alternate nature and fortune, I think. Yes, you're down as nature and fortune. Nature for Tom, fortune for Lynsey. We then get to Sapience. And what I'm going to say is Lynsey followed by Tom to alternate the short lines that are coming up. I think that works. Lynsey, Tom, Lynsey, Tom, Lynsey, Tom, Lynsey. Yes, it does. So it will be Lynsey as grammar, then Tom as logic, and alternate the next few along there. So we'll see how that goes. If we stumble. It'll be fine. I haven't fully planned this out. So, can you tell? After the place of great drinking, and nigh unto the same fountain of wine, did stand 4 children very richly adorned, representing grace, nature, fortune, and charity, who the one after the other pronounced these speeches following.
We ladies all by one consent, sundry ghostly gifts heavenly and divine to the king, as now we do present unto thy highness. Here we at this time utterly show and then determine, as I, Grace, first at thy coming, endue thee with science and moral cunning.
And I, Nature, with strength and fairness, for to be loved and dread of every weight.
And I, Fortune, with prosperity and riches, thee to defend and give thee right, long to enjoy and hold thy new right, in virtuous life with honour to proceed, that all thy sceptres thou may well possess.
God give unto thee a crown of glory, and the sceptre of clemency and pity, with a sword of might and victory, and a mantle of prudence to clothe thee, a shield of faith to defend thee, with a helm of health to thine increase, girded with a girdle of love and perfect peace.
At a certain distance from thence, nicely precise, as it were about the outer parts of the conduit, stood 8 richly apparelled like ladies, representing Sapience and the 7 Sciences Liberal, which declared certain goodly speeches as hereafter followeth. And first began Sapience.
Lo, I, chief princess Dame Sapience, show unto you this sentence of scripture. Kings that be of most excellence, by me they reign and most joy endure. For through my help and busy cure, their glory increaseth and high renown, having of wisdom full possession, for by the sentence of prudent Solomon, mercy and right preserveth every king, and clemency with faith observe above reason, keepeth his throne from peril of falling, and maketh it strong with long abiding. So I conclude, we ladies that here be, a king preserveth in long prosperity. Therefore we, the 7 Sciences Liberal, do offer our service to your grace potential.
I, grammar, with the silver key, unlock the door to science every way.
And I, logic, directly discuss all things uprightly.
And I, the adorned rhetoric, to beautify speeches is much politic.
And I, mystic, through exercise in numbering maketh men wise.
I, geometry, ordained for measuring, and as necessary for building.
Yet I, pleasant music for kings' pastime, am most liked.
I, prudent astronomy, describeth of planets the mystery. Therefore, noble king of high magnificence, behold yonder cloud of your grace's benignity, with the sun, the stars, and the bird descending thence, whom the godly queen your mother doth signify. By the virtue of the lion, you are descended lineally, through God's provision and his divine power, to succeed Henry VIII to England's great succour. For the phoenix bright that down taketh her flight from the clouds above is for to behold that lion of gold that long was her love, and also for to say your kingly majesty prosperiously to reign from the throne celestial with diadem imperial. She is come hither again to have your highness crowned, her most dearly beloved, and then to ascend upright from whence she came above unto Christ, her special love, where is no darkness but light. The noble king your father of late is fled up thither to joy in God alway, as the most Christian king that on the earth was living, his ransom for to pay.
So that last bit about the Phoenix Bright is going to be explicated in a moment. So in a sense, we should probably have paused just before it. Well done, Tom. You didn't fall into my trap. God damn it, because I did use in the original spelling of arithmetic there, as it appears in the text, is, yes, that's how it's spelt. Arithmetic is how you should have said it. No, it's not, but that's how you could have fallen
okay,
into it.
ours in Latin is art.
I know.
And
I'm
metric is like measuring stuff.
I know. I was just being mean. So we've got 4 graces, and then we get the 8 people. One is the warm up for the seven science liberal sciences, and we get some interesting clues here. So we got the 4 graces are described as children, we ladies all. And then the 8 are richly apparelled like ladies. So it does suggest that these are boys or people dressed as ladies, but not actually played by women. There, just to clarify, the text does seem to push us in that direction. Whether they're all boys or not, the Sapience and the 7 liberal sciences, there's not an indication that they're children as well. So are they adults, as opposed to the children who are higher up and therefore lighter? I don't know if they are actually higher up. Was that right? They're at a distance. The structure of this is slightly unclear. I would put the 4 graces slightly higher, but this whole structure seems to be quite long along the great conduit, because we're moving to another end of it in the next bit with the Phoenix. So this structure seems to be quite long and thin around.
I read this as probably being children reading it, because they're the kind of speeches that children of the schools would have been trained to speak, and these are obviously the sort of things that would have been taught in the schools as well. So there's a certain, and he's himself a child, so I think probably children rather than adults, but that's just a hunch.
Yeah,
I'd agree with that, simply because obviously the king is a child as well, and it might have seemed to be more in keeping if they were children.
Yes.
Possibly.
The only reason I brought it up is to say that at the end, the graces are explicitly stated to stand for children, and then we got the next description is but that doesn't mean anything per se.
Well, it's possible they're still boys, but older boys.
Yeah.
I mean, boys don't come in one size only. They range.
Are you sure? I think once you unpack them, they suddenly just expand. No, anyway.
Look, if you get them from IKEA, right?
I know. Yeah, and you know what happens when you can't find the little key. Anyway,
It would be nice for them to remind everybody that he's an orphan. Your parents are dead, both of them. Here's the mum who died giving birth to you. She's going to come back down from heaven to say hello, and then she's going to go away again.
Yeah, they really do. They go into it in quite a lot of detail. In fact, there's a bit more detail to come about this whole thing about the Phoenix, and yeah, the Lion and the Phoenix, yeah. Okay, yeah, let's finish off cheap then. The conduit. So Lynsey's just read about the Phoenix Bright. We're now going to get a little description explaining what's going on. I'll ask Liza to read the next paragraph. I'll ask Tracey to read the paragraph after that, and then I'll ask Lynsey and Tom to alternate being the various speakers. Regality, justice, mercy, truth, and all, and then I'll close the loop, as it were.
Then, at the end of the said conduit towards Cheap, there was a double scaffold, one above the other, which was hanged with cloth of gold and silk, besides rich arras. There was also devised under the upper scaffold an element, or heaven, with the sun, stars, and clouds very naturally. From this cloud there spread abroad another lesser cloud of white sarcenet, fringed with silk, powdered with stars and beams of gold, out of the which there descended a phoenix down to the nether scaffold, whereas, setting herself upon a mount, there spread forth roses, white and red, gillyflowers, and hawthorn boughs. After that, the said phoenix was there a little. There approached a lion of gold, crowned, making semblance of amity unto the bird, moving his head sundry times, between the which familiarity, as it seemed, there came forth a young lion, that had a crown imperial brought from heaven above as by 2 angels, which they set upon his head. Then the old lion and the phoenix vanished away, leaving the young lion, being crowned, alone.
Also there was upon the nether scaffold a sumptuous throne, whereupon sat a child, apparelled with rich cloth of gold, with a robe of crimson satin, representing the king's majesty. The which throne was upholded with 4 other children, who represented Regality, having a regale in his hand, Justice having a sword, Truth having a book, and Mercy having a little katana. We speak these speeches or words following.
Rule and govern prudently,
and do justice conightly,
but mixed with mercy,
that the truth may stand surely,
and thus your throne
shall endure permanently.
And towards the Cheap, behind the throne, the golden fleece was kept by 2 bulls and a serpent, casting out of their mouths flaming ire, according to the story of Jason. Also, there were 6 children richly apparelled, which played upon the regals and sang with great melody diverse goodly songs. And I'm sure we were all thinking it earlier when the young lion appeared. The circle of life. Hold forth the Lion King. It goes to show that, I just can see the kind of puppets and things that they're doing here. This would be absolutely adorable and exactly what a 9-year-old would want to watch. And I want to recreate this bit. I absolutely think, yeah, yeah, absolutely. But yeah, we've got lots of things. We've got lots of animals. We've finally got some animals. Actually, they're all there, and the puppet animals as well. They're doing things. They actually are articulated to do something. And we've also got 2 bulls and a serpent. I think that one's probably more static. Doing the Jason story. So it's nice to get the Jason and the Golden Fleece. That's always nice to have that one in. We've had that a lot of late. And 6 children singing diverse goodly songs. So, yeah. This is fab, this one. Tracey?
At this point, Edward is clearly completely loses interest. Everything else should have happened. Either he was scared by the bull and the snake and the thing, which sounds a bit nasty, or he just hadn't needed a nap.
Oh, he was overtired, wasn't he? He was overstimulated. Oh.
So the bull and the serpents are shooting out of their mouths flaming air. So, oh my gosh, are they using real fire for this? Is there a fire hose of some kind? I mean, it's a thing they could do. They absolutely could do this.
Yeah, it's not exactly complicated, or even if it's not, all you need to do is project some form of powder, and you could do that, any fat powder would do.
Yes, or have essentially a sparkler sticking out of their mouths that you could just light and it would burn till it was spent. You just have to make the lions and the serpents out of something that wouldn't burn, which I assume they could.
Yeah.
But I do love the articulated puppets. Now the phoenix just has to come down and ascend, and then the lion has to presumably walk, and then its head is separate, so its head would bow up and down.
Well, it needs to descend and then spread forth roses, white and red, etc. Yes. It's got to be cued in with other elements as well. Setting itself upon a mount there, spread forth roses. So maybe as its wings do something that rose. I don't know. There's some.
Yes, and then a crown descends from heaven, but we've had that in other pageants.
Though I'm forgetting the chronology of when that would have appeared in other ones. But yeah, it's a multi-layered thing. We can see above stars and sun, and we've got a sort of spreading out from the side of it clouds and things as well, beams of gold. I mean, this is a spectacular one. I'm there. Okay.
I'm thinking about the ceiling of the chapel in Hampton Court Palace, which was, I think, a favorite of Henry's. Is that? I could be wrong. But if you've seen the ceiling of that chapel, it's a brilliant lapis blue with gold stars all over it.
Okay. Any more at the conduit at Cheapside? So we're going to be moving a little bit further along now. We're going to be heading for the standard. So we're moving along Cheapside. So presumably we were at the Great Conduit. So it's just at the end of Cheapside. That's where we've been for this sequence. And that we're going to move along now to the standard. So not the little conduit. We're at the Great Conduit for that one. Excellent. Okay, let me get my stuff together. What are we doing next? So, who's England? Who have I said is England? Tom, haven't I? Yes. And then, Yeah, so if I could ask Lynsey, if you could read the prose. We've got England and ER set up. Tracey, do you know who ER is? I think you said earlier when I was talking.
I think it's undoubtedly Eduardo's strokes.
Oh, I see. Right, representation of the king. Ah, yes, because we've already had a little king about already. So, child apparelled with rich cloth of gold. So, representing of the king watching himself. Sort of an interesting experience that we've got here. So yes, So we'll read these next couple of speeches and the paragraphs orbiting it. So Lynsey, if you could be the orbiting, and everybody else will be the parts.
And then they proceeded in goodly order to the standard in Cheap. The same was hanged very richly about with cloth of tissue and arras. Upon the upper part was trumpets blowing melodiously, where should have been pronounced this speech in the name of England.
Most noble king, to whom by every right God hath committed of me, England, the crown. Ensue or follow your father's grace by day and night, whose only care was for my good renown. When foreign powers had got me under yoke, through God's truth he only me discharged of vice, which well nigh did me choke. He hath me rid and left with virtue England. Wherefore, good king, your father's steps ensue, as he did, so shall always find England your realm both faithful, just and true, subjects to God and to your goodly mind. For from which, because I purpose not to start, to rule by right, I give to you my heart.
Howbeit, because his grace passed by speedily, there were set upon the clothes and cast abroad in printed papers these words following.
E.R. David's seat unto thee we commend, Solomon's wisdom God thee send, Jehu's valiantness in thy rest, these three in one be in thy breast. The heart of a king is in God's hand, the strength of a realm is in a righteous king. A king ought to keep him in the band of the love of God in the same reading. A king's wisdom of God omnipotent to discern good from an evil thing. Take away ungodliness from the king, and his state shall be established with right judgment. Let us pray for our king and him honor. Edward VI, our earthly succor. God save the king.
They then proceeded to the cross in Cheap, which was very well painted and gilded. And at little beyond the cross, the Mayor of London, with his brethren the aldermen, attendant upon the King's Highness in their seemly apparel, received his grace with a proposition pronounced by Master Brooke, Recorder, and Master Chamberlain of London. And there they presented his Highness with a purse having 1,000 marks of gold in it, the which his grace received and gave them thanks. And then he proceeded to the little conduit in Cheap.
And there we'll briefly pause. So yes, we have the traditional bribe handed to the king, of which everyone in the city is always so delighted to have to cough up for. And we've encountered that in the last two royal entries that we've looked at. In fact, if you watch back on one of those previous videos, you'll see me being very confused as to what the hell was going on there, and then eventually twigging what was going on. I like to demonstrate my ignorance every so often, even though it was something we had encountered before and I'd just forgotten about. So that's always delightful. You can go back and watch that one. I think it's on Anne Boleyn's one. I think I totally cocked that one up. Anyway, thoughts about this, because it's where should have been pronounced this speech in the name of England. So this is the bit where Edward's getting a bit bored. Is this where we're getting things of what would have happened but didn't? and the nature of what's going on here, and the because His Grace passed by speedily, we have printed papers with these words following. So it's like they knew he wasn't going to linger here, so they made sure the paper there was a paper version available to read. So something sort of interesting there.
Yeah, I guess so. It's a funny moment, isn't it? Set upon the clothes.
Mm.
I'm not quite sure what happened.
Mm. But yes, it does sound like the standard in cheap, and the cross, which, the cross is very nicely set out, but the cross is just there for that little bit of presentation of gold to the king. And the king says, "Thank you very much," and immediately hands it to somebody else who carries it, presumably.
There's a lovely moment when King James and Prince Henry visit the merchant tailors in 1607, and Prince Henry made free of the company. And the company discussed in their minutes that the Queen was supposed to come but didn't come in the end. So they saved the money they would have had to give her that night.
Phew. So this is a much more muted sort of little sequence. It's potentially didn't happen. It's an interesting question. But there were trumpets blowing melodiously. So instead of the speech, they got music instead? Was that just a last-minute substitution going, Because I quite like England's speech, actually. It's quite nice. "To rule by right, I give to you my heart. England gives my heart to the king." There's something... It's quite an interesting little sentiment. Any more before we move on? Because we're moving on in a moment. We're at... the Little Conduit. We're slightly further along Cheapside now, where we're going to have some more stuff. Who's St. George? Lynsey is St. George, aren't you? Yes, you are. And yes, and then we get to the ballad, which we'll do. So I'll do... and the ballad is going to be split between Liza, who's doing the main text of the ballad, and Tom's doing the chorus. Okay, so I'll do the stuff around it, I suppose. No, Liza, if you could read the first bit of prose, and I'll read the rest of the prose, and you can then go on to the ballad person.
So let's see. And then he proceeded to the Little Conduit in Cheap. The same was hanged with cloth of arras, garnished with a target of St. George and the king's arms, 6 great streamers, 20 small banners, 24 targets, and at the top of the said conduit in a tower stood the waits playing, where there was also an ancient man sitting in a chair, apparelled with a gown of cloth of gold and a crown imperial upon his head, who had in his right hand a sceptre of gold, in his left hand a ball with a cross, representing the state of King Edward the Confessor. And before him there lay a lion of gold, which moved his head by devices. At the foot of the same conduit there was set a stage, whereupon was St. George on horseback in complete harness, with his page in harness also, holding his spear and shield, and a fair maiden holding a lamb in a string. Nigh unto whom there also was a child, appointed in rich apparel to have pronounced an oration in Latin, and St. George with the speech in English, as hereafter followeth.
Most royal King of England, Edward the Sixth, it is thy lot at this time of duty to be crowned, by the ordinance of God long before prefixed, that thou wast gotten and born into this world round. Wherefore you men of England to God are greatly bound to praise, honour, laud, and worship him above all thing that have given unto you such a noble and puissant king. I am George of England, under God the true guide to ancient kings, of the same most loving and kind, as it is manifestly known to all on every side, for to accomplish their honours I ever inclined. And now, good king, it is my faithful mind thee to honour and magnify, now as thou shalt understand. Under God thee to defend, ever ready at thy hand. Go now, good king, to be crowned with honour and joy, as thy foresaid ancestors have been in like manner. Thine enemies that would thee at any time hurt or annoy, I shall in the field for thy defence set forth my banner, and deliver thee from hurt, damage, or any danger against thy foes which shall stir debate or strife. And thus farewell, good King Edward, God send thee long life.
This speech in English with the other in Latin should have been pronounced, but for lack of time it could not be done. His Grace made such speed. Howbeit there was a song, the ditty whereof was thus. Take it away, a ballad of the King's Majesty.
Your song in time past hath been down a down, and long it hath lasted in town and town. To very much meter down hath been added, but up now is sweeter to make our hearts gladded.
Sing up, heart, sing no more down, but the joy in King Edward that weareth the crown.
King Edward up springeth from puerility, and toward us bringeth joy and tranquility. Our hearts may be light and of merry cheer. He shall be of such might, the world may him fear.
Sing up, heart, sing no more down, but joy in King Edward that weareth the crown.
His father, late our sovereign, both day and also hour, that in joy he might reign like a prince of high power, by sea and land hath provided for him eke, that never King of England had ever the like.
Sing up, heart, sing no more down, but joy in King Edward that weareth the crown.
He hath gotten already Boulogne, that goodly town, and biddeth sing speedily up and down. When he waxeth white and to manhood doth spring, he shall be straight of 4 realms the king.
Sing up, heart, sing no more down, but joy in King Edward that weareth the crown.
Ye children of England, for the honor of the same, take bow and shaft in hand, and learn shootage to frame, that you another day may so do your parts as to serve your king as well with hands as with hearts.
Sing up, heart, sing no more down, but joy in the King Edward that weareth the crown.
Ye children that are towards, sing up and down, and never play the cowards to him that weareth the crown, but always do your cure his pleasure to fulfill. Then shall you keep right sure the honor of England still.
Sing up, heart, sing no more down, but joy in Edward that weareth the crown.
Oh, what fun! What fun! I love the fact they've got a speech, and by this point the king's just speeding along. I mean, he's clearly hungry, or something, and he's just the procession is not hanging about, and all that they have time to, quick, play the song. It's that. I wonder. There's a lion of gold, and I'm wondering, is it the same lion as earlier? Did they quickly run round the back while no one was looking, or did they make 2 lions? Because it seems to be articulated. We don't have the Latin that they never performed, so it doesn't really matter. We don't have the Latin because they never performed it. It's like poor St. George. You've got this speech. No, never happened. So this whole sequence, in fact, along with England and ER, it does seem to suggest that bit was not performed, or if it was performed, the king didn't hear it, and yeah, because he just went straight on. Well, he's the king. I suppose he can do what he likes. Liza.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to know whether the king went fast, went quickly through this of his own volition, or whether it was the lords with him who set the pace, especially the Lord Protector, Somerset, I think. But I was struck by the contrast with the royal entry of Queen Elizabeth, or was it her coronation pageant?
We did do Elizabeth's coronation.
Yeah, so Elizabeth, when sometimes it's noted down in the pageant that she was the speaker was too far away from her, or too fast or too slow, and she couldn't hear. And she usually would stop and ask for the speech to be given again, or ask for it to be explicated to her by whoever had made the pageant. You picture a nervous director, cap in hand. But
she knew how to work the crowd and to work the performers, make the performers feel comfortable.
She did, but more than that, I think she genuinely wanted to see the show. After all, it had been written for her and would only be performed once. Edward, or whoever is calling the shots for Edward, seems much less interested. Like, oh God, they're going to give a Latin oration. Quick, let's get to the pub, people. You know, we've got a 9-year-old here with a 9-year-old's bladder control.
Yeah. I mean, we've got to be a bit careful about the stuff for Elizabeth as well, because of course some of that may not have been true, because the nature of that particular kind of almost propagandic quality to it.
It read quite journalistically in the account of the sort of theatrical cock-ups, saying, you know, oh, in this one the boy was too far away from her and she couldn't hear what he was saying, but in this next pageant the boy was in a good place. It was okay.
Yeah, but there was still quite a lot of spin there. Whereas I'm not sure about what this particular text is for as well, in terms of how it's disposed after existence. I think that one had a slightly wider release.
I just checked actually, and there was no printed pageant book as there was for Elizabeth. I think Elizabeth was the first one that was printed in that form. So yeah, what we're working with here is kind of documentary records as much as anything else.
And that's the worry, because there was an awful lot of hagiography going on in the Elizabeth one that, you know, I'm not saying it wasn't true, I'm just saying we just have to be a little bit more careful about its function as propaganda. What was the other thing? The Lord Protector isn't here. There's someone standing in for him. Supplying in lieu of the Lord Protector, and then a little Somerset Lord Protector is there. So okay, I don't know what he's doing in lieu of the Lord Protector if the Lord Protector is there. Oh well, who knows. There was something happening there. Liza, you're speaking, but there is no sound.
Somerset would probably, I'm guessing anyway, that Somerset would have been Earl Marshal if he hadn't been marching in loco parentis as Lord Protector. The rank of Earl Marshal would have been his.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Or the office of Earl Marshal, I should say.
Anyway, let us get to St. Paul's. So that's where we are next. We've moved slightly further along Cheapside. We're now at St. Gregory's Church in Paul's Churchyard. So yes, we've moved further along Cheapside. And there's some rope business going on. That's interesting. Who's Truth? Lynsey, I think, is Truth later on. So Liza, I'll ask you to read the next big chunk. Then we might pause before we move further on. Yeah, Liza, just give us the next chunk of prose.
Ooh, well, this is exciting. And when the king came almost to St. Gregory's Church in Paul's Churchyard, there was a rope as great as the cable of a ship, stretched in length from the battlements of Paul's steeple, and with a great anchor at one end, fastened a little before Master Dean of Paul's house gate. And when his majesty approached near the same, there came a man, a stranger being a native of Aragon, lying on the same rope, his head forward, casting his arms and legs abroad, running on his breast on the said rope, from the said battlements to the ground, as it had been an arrow out of a bow, and stayed on the ground. Shall I go on?
Yeah, carry on. Yeah.
Then he came to the king's majesty and kissed his foot. And so after certain words to his highness departed from him again, and went upwards upon the said rope till he was come over the midst of the said churchyard, where he, having a rope about him, played certain masteries on the said rope, as tumbling and casting himself from one leg to another, then took the said rope and tied it to the cable, and tied himself by the right leg a little beneath the wrist of the foot, and hung by the one leg a certain space, and after recovered himself up again with the said rope, and undid the knot, came down again, which stayed the king's majesty with all the train a good space of time. and then proceeded in goodly order to the great conduit in Fleet Street.
So he gets to watch some rope tricks, some climbing and gymnastic tumbling and stuff. What fun!
They've brought in a guy from Aragon to do this, and I can't recall seeing circus skills used in any other pageant that we've examined. Tracey, can you?
No, not for pageantry. No, I mean they probably were kind of ancillary sort of entertainments, but not built into the main event. And rope dancers were not particularly well known in London until later either. So that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, and certainly not on this scale, from the steeple of St. Paul's to the ground right in front of the Dean of St. Paul's house.
I think this is pretty clearly aimed at entertaining a 9-year-old. Would have entertained me. I mean, that's quite a long way. St. Gregory is in the southwestern corner of the church, of the cathedral, and the Dean's house, if it's close to where it is now, it's off Carter Lane. So, yeah, it's a couple of streets away.
Okay, excellent. Right, well, we're going to move on. Tom, I'll ask you to read the next bit of prose. Lynsey to read truth. Then Liza the next paragraph, and I'll close the whole thing off. So we're passing St. Paul's now. We're going to the great conduit at Fleet Street. So that's moving a little further along there. And on the map as I've currently got it, and we're going to carry on and see where we end up. So at the Great Conduit in Fleet Street, Tom, take it away.
The same was hanged about with arras, and there was spread divers streamers, upon the which was also made a stage, wherein sat a child in very rich apparel, which represented truth, and was accompanied with 2 other children before him in red, and they represented faith and justice, whose names were before them written in their place. As the king's grace passed by, truth saluted him with these words following.
I, ancient truth, which long time was suppressed with heathen rites and detestable idolatry, have in thy realm been in great part refreshed by God's servant, my defender, King Henry, who more than once, tendering God's glory, hath made me free, whom abuses long kept bound, and hath therefore God's mercy always found. Wherefore, if you will me likewise embrace, as did your father, most loving King Edward, then shall the God of truth give you his grace to bring your devices luckily forward. Then shall England, committed to your guard, rejoice in God, which hath given her nation, after old David, a young King Solomon.
Is it my turn?
Yes, please.
Okay. And as soon as the king's grace was passed, there were let run 2 hogsheads of wine to the people, take who would. And then proceeded in goodly order to Temple Bar. The gate was painted and fashioned with battlements and buttresses of diverse colors, richly hanged with cloth of arras, garnished with 14 standards and flags, with 8 French trumpets, blowing their trumpets after the fashion of their country, and besides them a pair of regales and children singing to the same. And then proceeded in goodly order until they came to Westminster, to his grace's palace, whereas stood all the noblemen in order as they had conducted his highness, where he lighted. And at the hall door he took his leave of the ambassadors, giving them thanks for their pains, and so proceeded in goodly order until his chamber, whereas all things was prepared for him according as appertained to his estate and highness. And that night, warning was given to all noblemen to be at Westminster the next day by 7 of the clock in the morning in their best array, to give their attendance upon the coronation.
But that's another story. So yeah, lots of little things there. We got three children again: Faith, Justice, and Truth, speaking, and as a goodwill for the people, immediately after that finishes, they release the wine.
2 hogsheads.
And then we get more music. We get more display. 8 French trumpets blowing their trumpets after the fashion of their country. Yeah, I don't know what French trumpeting is like as opposed to English trumpeting. I'm sure someone knows.
I don't. I should, but I don't.
No. And then and my map doesn't have that as a next stop, but they come to Westminster. That's I say one of the various options as to where they go after that. They have that option. Yeah, and then tomorrow it's crowning time. Yes, and I say there is presumably going to be another session where we dive more into the history side of things rather than the ceremonial is a kind of theatre. So, and I think we've got quite a lot of accounts of what the oaths and what the actual ceremony itself was like. So we might dig into that another time. Tracey, do you have any more sort of data on this event? You had other things you might you said you might have for us.
I quoted a little bit earlier from the City of London records, and it follows exactly the same kind of line. We're describing the same event. So I think what they're doing is they're kind of writing up what they were told to do. They were only responsible for the bit as far as Temple Bar. After that, you're in Westminster anyway. It makes a big deal out of the money, which is not terribly surprising, really. He presented the alderman and recorder standing gowns of scarlet presented unto His Majesty in the name of the whole city by the mouth of the recorder in the name of the benevolence and token of their good hearts towards His Grace 1,000 marks in whole new sufferances of gold in a goodly purse of purple cloth of gold, which present His Highness received with his own hand with right grateful and thankful wise, which sum of money and more by the name of benevolence was before right lovingly granted and paid by citizens of the said city. Yeah, right. Well, they were assessed for it. Lovingly and gratefully paid, I'm not so sure. Reluctantly and grudgingly paid, probably. But yes, I know, as you'd expect with this document coming from the city, it's much more emphasis there on the role of the city and the livery companies and the alderman and the Lord Mayor and so on. But I love the wine, pretty witty and artificial devices piping the wine through the conduits. Every party needs.
Yeah, I think we all need
that and lions that move their heads by cunning devices.
Yes, I like devices. I'm interested by devices. So, yeah, anyone who wants to do something with this, I think we've got the element of this particular law measure that we royal entry that we particularly like, which is definitely the phoenix and the lion. I feel that is one to really enjoy, and just for the sake of it, then also hire someone to do some aerobatics. I think that's some rope dancing, because that sounds like fun. I'm not doing it myself. We'll hire someone else to do that. That would be cool.
Eric will do it.
Yeah, Eric will be fine
Eric
for that.
will do it, yeah.
And yeah, I mean, it's really interesting, the sort of the overlaps, but also the differences between the civic pageantry that we've been looking at with Lord Mayor shows and similar to this, where you feel that because we don't generally get the pouring of wine in great abundance for Lord Mayor shows. It's just something I feel that is greatly lacking. But of course, the Lord Mayor does keep open house, so in a sense, there's going to be plenty of booze.
Yeah, they just don't talk about it in the official kind of books and so on. But actually, they had wine in the barges. They had wine while they were standing by the rails. So they had plenty of wine, but it was for them. It wasn't just the general public.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, all of these events, even if they're not officially organised, there's going to be plenty of stuff flowing everywhere. Very
much so. I'm off to a company dinner on Wednesday, and if there's no wine, I want money back.
Yeah. Right. Any additional material or thoughts that anyone wants to throw in before we close the session on this? As I say, there is more material around King Edward that we will probably get round to looking at, and a lot more royal entries or royally kind of material to look at, as well as the sort of remaining civic pageantry that we've got to go through. That we will endeavour to do all of. If it looks before me, we will look at it, and we will try and do something with it. Again, I'm always more interested in the sort of the accounts of what actually happened, and I love the fact that Edward just sort of sauntered by, or at least the procession just went, sod this.
Well, of course, James did the same thing, but he didn't have the excuse of being 9 years old.
Except in thought. Okay, any final thoughts in the room? Anyone want to throw anything in? I won't pick on you. Just wave if you want to leap in. But no, I enjoyed that rather a lot. I'm glad there were animals. I was not expecting articulated animals, and so that has pleased me. So large scale puppeteers, get in touch. We'll talk. So, on that note, all that remains is to thank all our wonderful readers for all their wonderful reading. Thank you very much, everyone, and goodbye. God save King Edward. He didn't.